Hello and welcome to Tech Latest by Nikkei Asia, where we bring you the freshest updates from the technology sector in Asia. Every episode, one of our reporters from the region will be filling us in on the tech news on their radar, from semiconductors in China to space travel in Japan to startups in Indonesia. From Nikkei Asia's Tokyo headquarters, I'm Alice French. In this episode, I'm chatting to Cissy Zhou, our senior business news correspondent who's based in Hong Kong, who has an update on the progress at TSMC's upcoming semiconductor plant in Kumamoto, southern Japan. Hi Cissy, always a pleasure to have you on.
Hi Alice.
So there's been a lot of buzz around Taiwanese chipmaker TSMC's upcoming plant in Kumamoto on Japan's Kyushu island this week. For listeners that might not be familiar with the project, can you just fill them in? Why is TSMC opening up a factory here? It's going to be their first ever plant in Japan, right?
Yes, the Kumamoto project was announced in October 2021, and construction already began last year, and mass production is expected to start next year. So the project costs around $8 billion. So far, the progress has been quite smooth. So TSMC is also planning to construct a second chip plant in Japan, which will cost more than $7 billion. So why is TSMC building chip factory in Japan? It is part of their broader global push by the company because governments around the world, they are calling for semiconductor production to be brought onshore for economic and national security reasons, as you know. And also the rising tensions between Taiwan and China is another contributing factor.
Wow, so they're really throwing a lot of money at these plans. And Nikkei Asia reported on Tuesday that the Kumamoto plan that you mentioned was making good progress and that preparations might even be going more smoothly than TSMC's upcoming plant in Arizona in the US, plans for which were unveiled in 2020. So what signs of progress are we seeing in Kumamoto and what's holding things back over in the States?
Yes, Alice, you're right. I'd like to introduce a great story by our correspondents Annie and Ryotaro. So TSMC will begin installing equipment at its Kumamoto facility this month, and tool installation is a crucial step in semiconductor plant construction because it requires a high level of expertise and collaboration with hundreds of suppliers. And once tools are in place, a chip plant can start to run test production, and if all goes well, they can start mass production. And in addition, TSMC has also sent hundreds of support staff to the site in Kumamoto, and then they will soon be joined by hundreds of TSMC suppliers. Meanwhile, TSMC has trained more than 300 Japanese staff in Taiwan for the investment in Japan. For the US, as you know, the mass production in the Arizona facility, which was originally slated to begin next year, has been delayed to 2025. TSMC itself said that one reason for the difference is because the scale between the two projects in the two countries are different. But sources told us that there are other important factors because Japan has better chip industry infrastructure than the US. And Japan has also been more supportive from the government. So far, the review process in the US appears to be much slower than Japan too, because the Japanese government has streamlined quite a few red tapes for TSMC, while the US regulations are more complicated. And that makes it very difficult for TSMC to bring its more than 100 suppliers to Arizona. And also, the slower allocation of American subsidies could also delay chip makers' process.
Right, and you mentioned that TSMC feels like the Japanese government has been quicker to support the new plant than the US government. What kind of support exactly has Japan provided?
The Japanese government has already earmarked $3.5 billion worth of subsidies for the TSMC project. And in contrast, the US only finalized the CHIPS Act, which is a package of support for the industry, last month, and has yet to allocate the funds. And in Japan, TSMC has partners such as Sony, who knows about the chip making sector, right? But it doesn't have such local collaborators in the US. As I mentioned before, the Japanese government is very needy to make this TSMC investment as smooth as possible. So they have streamlined the regulations that enables TSMC to bring up its supply chain and workers much faster. Also, there are multiple direct flights between Taiwan and Kumamoto, but there are no direct flights between Taiwan and Phoenix. You need to spend basically at least 20 hours if you travel from Taiwan to Arizona. And then construction workers at the Kumamoto plant are working around the clock, as local suppliers told us, which is not the same case in the US. And also TSMC's major construction partners are mainly Japanese contractors in Kumamoto, so which is a good thing because Taiwanese suppliers have less experience of operating in a foreign country.
Wow, okay, so TSMC's Kumamoto plant definitely promises big things for the company and for Japan's chip-making industry as a whole. But we're not quite at the point yet where TSMC is looking to Japan or other countries like the US, as you mentioned, as alternatives to its home turf of Taiwan, right?
Not really. Although TSMC is also building a facility in Germany, but Taiwan is still the best, because the speed in Taiwan is still faster than any other countries. And in Taiwan, it's possible to hoist the semiconductor equipment in just one day with a crane. Well, in Japan, it might take 2 or 3 days, but in the US, it might take more than a week. So that really affects the speed of building the factory. And then, to Japan specifically, the country has an aging workforce problem. And one Japanese supplier told us that TSMC is actually having problems or troubles securing experienced production engineers for its new plant, because Japan had a 10-year blank period in which it didn't produce any cutting-edge chips. And the people who have come to work for the Kumamoto project, they are mostly in their 50s.
Okay, well, thank you very much for giving us the rundown on that story. And as you say, I'd really recommend listeners to go and find the full story on our website. Now, just before we go, are there any other pieces this week that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
I'd like to recommend my colleague Sayan's story about foreign investors embracing Indians' loss-making tech startups. Well, domestic fund managers are taking a very cautious investment approach in India. The implication is that foreign inflow will be crucial for some of the tech IPOs in the pipeline in India, particularly the bigger flotations. And then you can check out more detailed information on our website.
Great. Well, thank you, Cissy. It's been great to chat, and I hope that you'll come back on again soon. That's all for this episode. You can read more of Cissy's reporting, along with a host of other stories about Asia's tech industry, on Nikkei Asia's website, asia.nikkei.com. And if you like what you hear, why not subscribe to our weekly Tech Asia newsletter, which will be delivered to your inbox every Thursday. There's a link to sign up in the show notes. And check back in next time for more update tech trends that matter.